So I kind of want the buttons to look different than each other. Like I want the delete button to be red. I want the favorite button to look different somehow. So it'd be cool if those had classes on them. But you know what? This whole, gosh dang, render item is really, really long right now. It seems like this whole job of adding the buttons could be delegated to a different function. And I mentioned earlier, I kind of wanted to wrap the buttons in another div to make my styling easier later, because ultimately what I want to happen is for all the properties to be on the left and all the buttons on the right. That's going to be easier for me if all the buttons are inside another div. So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to make a separate function for that. So I'm going to call it renderActionButtons. How about that? renderActionButtons. And what does it need? Probably needs the flick and the item again, like all those others. Flick and item. And it's basically going to do all this stuff. But it's going to do it all inside of a div, and then we're going to return the div. So let's make ourselves a div. Const, I'm going to call it actions, document.create element div. I'm going to throw the class name of actions on there. So actions.classList add actions. Basically, I'm trying to get to this point. Don't copy this. I'm just demonstrating what I want this to look like. I want to have my LI here. Then I want to have all my other stuff. And then I want to have this div called actions. And inside that div, I want to have my two buttons, right? I want it to be structured like this. That's what I'm trying to do. So let's put a class on there. I'm going to put a class on each of these buttons. I like the idea of putting that before the text content. Doesn't really matter. Delete button dot class list add. For whatever reason, I like remove better than delete. Favorite button. Let's do the same thing. Fave button dot class list add. Fave. Notice, by the way, in my CSS, I specifically said, oh no, I just said dot fave. Yeah, I said dot fave. So that'll actually match that, which maybe is not what I want. Maybe I want the button and the list item to be styled differently. Yeah.
So you already showed us how to connect like the HTML and the JavaScript code, but I don't see a line in the CSS where like connects them.
So in the CSS, each rule is preceded by a selector, which are exactly the same things you put inside query selector. So each of these says, like this line is literally saying, grab me any element from the page with a class name of Chris. Grab me any element from the page with a class name of .fav. Here's the class name of FAV. So that's just how CSS works. This is a selector, so it's automatically going to match any elements on the HTML that match that.
I also know to like look at that HTML file.
Because in the HTML, we've got a link here. Link to index.css. Yep. So it's a script tag for JavaScript and a link tag for CSS. All right, so there's that. So I've, instead of appending them to the item, I will append them to the div actions. And I'll make sure that I append that, or return that, return actions. So that gives me back a div now containing those things. So down in render item, where we took all of this out, add action buttons. I just need to call this dot render action buttons, pass in the flick and the item. I'll go ahead and save that to a variable. Whoops. There it is. Go ahead and save that to a variable called actions. We could do this all in one line, but I'll do it on 2 lines for clarity's sake. And then just say item.appendChild actions. I could totally just put all this inside appendChild, but sometimes just trying to make things as few lines as possible isn't the most helpful thing. Does it work? Civil War with Evans. Okay, there it is, and sure enough, our button's gold now. Let's have a look at this. There we go. Div class of actions, and my buttons are inside there. Which I said I wanted to do for reasons of future CSS. You dig? Yeah, Kate. Sorry. That was 3 weeks ago. Stephanie, Jiminy Christmas. You don't even look anything like her. You're just sitting roughly the same place.
How come if the CSS file is in the... So the CSS file works if it's put in the head tag in HTML, but then the JavaScript one has to be in the body if the head doesn't work?
So that's not inherent in JavaScript. It depends on what you're doing with JavaScript. So the issue is right off the bat, the first thing that JavaScript does is try to get stuff on the page with query selector, right? So as soon as you hit that script tag, it's going to run the JavaScript. And if that's happening in the head, it's going to try to find something on the page that isn't on the page yet. So it's trying to find things that aren't there yet. Whereas with the style sheet, you're just adding rules. And those rules apply even if things get added to the page later. Right? So those rules are just sitting there. You're just defining rules. So that's why. If you're trying to do things with things that aren't on the page yet. Yep. We could write it in such a way that it didn't matter, but it's become kind of conventional. Just put it at the bottom of the body. Cool. So what do we do? Extract render action buttons method. Now we've got more methods that are just doing one job instead of one that's doing about 1 million jobs. Feels a little better. Makes it a little easier to find it should you need to change it later. Yeah?
Okay, so the function that you just created right now, renderActionButtons, you're able to create 2 different buttons with a delete and also paper.
Yeah, I just...
So if you were to call that function, because I'm used to functions being able to only do one thing. So if you call that function, how do you decide which one's going to create?
It's going to do both.
Oh,
Yeah, that's what it does. It's a...
this is especially tailored for this particular instance.
Yeah, I mean, you just put more code in that function, and which is not always a great idea. We should probably have one that just makes one button at a time, but that's not what we did. Because this does look awfully redundant, doesn't it? But we're not going to take the time to do that just yet. Cool.